Hello and welcome back. So continuing on with our introduction to ANTLR, in this video we're going to take a look at how we can go about getting ANTLR set up on our computer. More specifically, we're going to take a look at how we can get ANTLRWorks, which is a GUI development environment set up on our computer. And we're going to go from there with taking a quick look at the actual development environment. Nelson?
All right, so ANTLRWorks is just, like Jason said, just a tool to allow you to write ANTLR files in a very effective way. To grab it, head over to ANTLR.org/works. And
so what makes it nice using this? I mean, if they weren't grabbing ANTLRWorks, what would they need to do?
well, at that point, you would need because basically ANTLR, the relationship between an ANTLR grammar file and the generated code is the same relationship between a C# code file and the compiled executable, which means you can technically write ANTLR grammar files inside of Notepad, but it's not going to be very pleasant, just as writing C# code inside of Notepad wouldn't be very pleasant.
So using this IDE here, basically we're going to end up with things like syntax highlighting and debugging syntax errors in a console, things like that?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So it's a really nice thing. It comes prepackaged with ANTLR. Generally speaking, when you use ANTLR with a project, you will include the ANTLR binaries with your project inside of source control. But in this case, it comes entirely prepackaged with a version of ANTLR. In this case, I believe this is going to be ANTLR 3.4.
Okay.
So go ahead and find your operating system down here and download it. And what you're going to get is a jar file. So as you see, I have a jar file downloaded right here. Stick that jar file anywhere you want. It's an executable Java file. As long as you have a Java virtual machine installed, which if you don't, head over to java.com and grab one, you'll be able to execute it directly. Now, once you have it, just stick it somewhere, make a shortcut to it, and you're good. It's all self-contained into that single file. So I already have ANTLRWorks right here pinned to my taskbar, so I can go ahead and launch it. Now, the first thing it's going to ask you is whether you want to work with ANTLR grammar files or string template groups. ANTLR grammar files are what we've been talking about up till now, and string template groups are a feature of ANTLR that we're not going to go over. But just to give a rough overview, string template is another language, like ANTLR is a language. It's another language that allows us to take the output of ANTLR and directly output structured text from a grammar file without having to create another program that uses, these generated files. We can use string template to go from an ANTLR grammar file all the way to text, whether that text is assembly language or IL or whatever you're doing.
Okay.
But in this case, we're working with ANTLR 3 grammar files. So
now,
when you launch it,
when somebody first launches it, they're not going to see this right here, are they?
Unless they somehow have CGS.G3 on their computer, no. You'll probably get an empty window. If you do not get an empty window to create a new grammar file, you just head over to File, New, select a ANTLR 3 grammar, hit OK, give it a name, and then hit OK after that. But in this case, to kind of show some of the features of ANTLRWorks,
even before that, if you don't mind, let's just kind of take a trip around the UI. Get me kind of familiar with this. I'm not familiar with ANTLRWorks.
Okay, so at the top we have a menu bar. In the center we have these windows, and that's about it.
Well, no, I mean the window's divided up into three different areas.
So over here we have an outline of our ANTLR file, broken into parser rules and lexer rules. Over
those
here,
parser rules, that's being picked up from the actual grammar file on the right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's all being parsed by this. This is where you will spend most of your time entering in the grammar for your language.
So if you click on any of these things over on the left, it's going to take you to that in the right? Nice.
Yep.
Okay.
In addition, it's also going to show down here in your syntax diagram window. So there's a bunch of these tabs down here which are very, very important. The syntax diagram window is going to give you, well, syntax diagram of whatever you have selected. So in this case, I have the parser rule selected, and you see there's this nice little straightforward diagram of how it actually fits together. Like here's the declaration, here's the selector, so you can see a selector.
I'll go back up to declaration. Oh yeah, identifier, : value, semicolon. Nice. Go to selectors. selector, comma selector. Okay, go to, yeah, just.
Well, what this syntax diagram means is that a selector is optionally, a selectors is a selector optionally followed by a comma,
with
and then
other
a selector, and then it could optionally loop back into a comma or another selector.
Yeah, so if you just go to selector, that's what I was going to say a second ago. There we go.
Selector, we have a selector type, pseudo selector, child selector. If we go to like selector type, we'll get class selector or element selector or ID selector or parent selector.
Man, that's awesome.
And then, yeah, if we go to class selector, we'll see dot followed by a dent. If you remember
Nice.
from
Yep.
CGS, dot ident is going to be a class selector.
So go down to just value.
Value is going to be a term followed by optionally a space.
Okay.
Or a white space followed by more terms. A term is going to be a numeric value or an identifier or a string or a resource or a color hash or a color RGB or a color RGBA. Like a color RGB, for example, is going to be RGB followed by open parenthesis, followed by number, followed by comma, followed by number, followed by comma, followed by number, followed by closed parenthesis. And you'll see that if I look at RGB, this is how I achieve case and sensitivity. RGB is R token followed by a G token followed by a B token. An R token is going to be either the R string character literal or the lowercase r character literal.
Gotcha. So on the icons on the left, we're looking at the green ones. Those are going to be parser rules, and then the other ones are going to be the Lexa rules.
Yep. So as you see, if you can, the only thing that differentiates a parser rule from a Lexa rule is a Lexa rule starts with an uppercase, a parser rule starts with a lowercase.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the parser rules will be stuck into the parser class that's generated. The Lexa rules will be stuck into the Lexa class that's generated.
Excellent. All right, so what other features do we have?
Well, one of my particularly favorite features, and one that you'll be using considerably lot while actually working with ANTLRWorks, is the interpreter. And the interpreter lets you type in code on the left and apply, or not code, but text, any text you want, and apply it to any of the rules that you want.
Okay.
Now, in this case, I'm going to be applying it to this top-level rule, which is called style sheet. If we look at the syntax diagram for style sheet is just a bunch of rules. And then a rule is the selectors followed by the declarations.
Okay.
So if we go ahead and do like test font size 12 pt and run this against the style sheet rule, what we'll get here on the right is the parse tree. And the parse tree will show us how ANTLR actually went about taking in your input text, applying the rules to it, and then moving forward. So you'll see that it starts with the style sheet rule, which we saw right here. It goes into the rule, which we have right here, followed by the selectors rule, followed by the selector rule, followed by the selector types rule, followed by the class selector rule, and the class selector rule is finally made up by a dot token and an identifier token. So all the leaves here are going to be tokens.
Very cool. Yeah,
so,
that's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, definitely will help you out.
So it's just a very convenient way to go in and start testing out the rules that you've put together to make sure that things are being parsed properly.
Yep. It's the most straightforward way to accomplish this. There are some circumstances where the interpreter doesn't work right, but we'll get into those. It's more of some of the advanced ANTLR features.
So I see we also have a console and a debugger down in the bottom.
Yeah, the console is cool. Definitely pay attention to the console. Like if I interpret a bunch of times, you'll see interpreting. But what's really important about the console is that you'll notice that I get a bunch of syntax errors whenever I put in a syntax.
Instant feedback too. Cool.
So you'll see that I deleted a semicolon on line 8, and then I added it back. And I deleted
nice
it again.
Red error indicator at the bottom too.
Yep. This button will light up when there are errors in your console. If you click on it, it'll navigate you to the console window wherever you are, and it'll clear that flag.
Very cool.
Now the debugger is interesting. And the issue with the debugger at this case, let me take a quick look down this particular, I don't know, let's try it. There we go. See, the problem with the debugger, and I actually do kind of want to get this to work because it's so awesome, but the problem with the debugger that you'll always have to keep in mind is that the debugger requires that your grammar file compiles into Java.
Oh, so now you're going to have to go change that hidden channel
Well,
thingy.
actually, I think I cheated already.
Oh,
The hidden's already there.
it is.
What I need to change in this case is the literal C# code.
I see.
And actually,
So for those of you that are confused about hidden, don't worry, we'll talk about that later. It's magic.
yes. Yeah. I guess we could pause the video, get this to work in Java, and show off the debugger.
Okay, I'll pause right now. Hang on. All right, so we're back recording, Nelson, and you've made a few changes.
Yeah, I just went ahead and Java-fied my code so it would actually compile.
So we can't use the debugger when we're doing it when we're generating for C#.
Well, as long as you don't use some literal C# code that isn't compatible with the Java counterpart.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you'll see here I had to change text, this substring to lowercase substring because the Java method is lowercase substring. And then here I use the length method instead of the uppercase length property. So those are some of the things that you will have to change. If you use some of these features within your ANTLR grammar file, they will not be compatible with the debugger. But sometimes things become so difficult that I found myself actually Javifying this code in the past to get the debugger to work because it is such a useful tool.
Okay. Well, show us this awesome tool.
Okay, so to get in the debugger, hit Control-D, and you'll get this. You'll get your input text. And at this point, you can type in any text you want. I'm going to do test, and then I'm going to do font, weight, bold, and then, I don't know, H1, color, blue, background, RGB, 1, 2, 3, and then maybe even and hover. So nice little style sheet here for testing whatever you need to test. And you hit OK, and what you're going to get right here in your debugger is the ability to step through your input and watch your parse tree or your abstract syntax tree grow. You'll also be able to look at your events as they happen. So to do that, basically what you're going to I just hit this button on accident. What you're going to want to do is hit the step forward, and you'll actually be able to watch as everything is parsed.
Oh, yeah. So you're seeing the parse tree build, and you're also seeing where you're at in your actual grammar file.
Yep.
That's awesome.
And something that the interpreter won't actually show you is that you'll see some things like this green text right here. This has to do with the semantic predicate.
Okay.
Which we'll go over. It's an advanced feature, but this is something that the interpreter can't support, but the debugger does. So you can watch your syntax tree be built.
What's really cool is if you look over in your input window, you can actually see which character it's working.
Yep. And you can also click on the characters to actually see them represented in your parse tree as well.
Very slick. Yeah, I like that.
So I'm going to go ahead and hit the end.
Okay.
Which is going to go ahead and parse everything out, and so you'll see all this stuff.
Nice.
Got all parsed out right. Now you can also switch over to your AST, which is going to show the actual abstract syntax tree that was generated from your input. So in this case, because we remember how we talked about how ANTLR can generate a multitude of different things. One of those things is an AST. This is a graphical representation of the AST that was generated. You'll notice the distinct lack of a bunch of stuff that was in the parse tree. So if we look at the parse tree, we see a bunch of stuff. If we look at the AST, we don't see a bunch of stuff. Things like the colon symbol was stripped out between the color and blue, and it was also reorganized to be a parent of that particular name and so on. So it's a really nice way to see or it's a really nice way to graphically represent your AST when debugging. Okay. So it's a very awesome tool. You can go forwards, you can go backwards, you can go forwards, you can step through, you can even step over individual rules if you wanted to. It's just a pretty cool tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you'll notice that you can actually edit the code when you're in debugger mode. So to end your debugging session, you can go ahead and hit the stop icon. And you'll still be able to see your AST and your parse tree, but you can now edit your code again.
Okay. Yeah, that's very cool. So at this point, everybody should go ahead and grab ANTLRWorks, get it set up, and then I think we're going to jump back over to a little bit of theory stuff and start talking about actual grammar files in the next video.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, well, that'll wrap up this quick overview of ANTLRWorks, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.